So today I'm just going to talk about UI UX stuff, and then going to play some games and hopefully talk about the UI UX stuff within those, and we can see what's good, what's bad, what could be improved, what's interesting, stuff like that. I guess I should introduce myself first, because this is my first stream and not many people know who I am, I guess, or what I do at Brace Yourself. So I am working as UI UX designer at Brace Yourself. Originally I'm a computer scientist, and I've been working in the industry for 6 years or so. Originally as kind of a gameplay programmer, and then working more recently in UI kind of programming. And then I'm sort of gradually moved towards taking on more responsibility for UX design. I've always been interested in design itself. I started out making websites. That was my first foray into programming was PHP and making web stuff. So I've always been kind of interested in design. I've never had a formal training in it. And then I started moving into the programming side when I worked at Don't Nod on Vampire. So Vampire was action RPG thing with a lot of menus and a lot of kind of widgets and stuff. So I got a lot of experience. While I didn't design it, I got to see kind of stuff that went wrong and stuff that went right, and what the problems are facing that. So yeah. Thanks for the question, NDR. The difference between UI and UX is still. I was debating whether to even put it in the presentation because I still have trouble defining it. They're kind of it's a Venn diagram of two overlapping circles. So to me, I see UI as the artistic side of stuff. So in this screenshot, it would be the colors kind of chosen and the fact that the icons are drawn in a sketchy style. It's the art side of stuff. And then the UX is more the usability. So you would come up with ideas of okay, we need a hover state for the buttons because we need to know when players go over them. It's kind of the more conceptual stuff. Okay, the layout should be this because players look at the top of the screen first, and so things should be laid out like this. But then the actual painting of it would be the UI responsibility. I guess it's kind of if you're building a house, maybe it's the engineering side, thinking about is it structurally sound? Does it make sense? Where should the doors be from a perspective of how can people get in and out from what's usable and then what's also safe, you have fire safety stuff. But then the artists would come in and say, we should make the walls this color because it's quite nice. And there's a lot of theory behind that too, of what colors should you make the buttons? And so that's where UI and UX kind of overlap. So I'm not an artist by trade, and I'm still not very good at drawing and art and stuff. So I always see myself as more of a UX person, programming plus UX than UI. So yeah, hopefully that clears it up a little bit. But it's definitely a vague concept, and you can search online. I can bump down the music. Let's see if I can do that. I think it's because this song's a little bit loud as well. Hopefully that's a little bit better. Maybe I can sit a little bit closer to the mic as well. I think I turned down the music. Better. Okay, that's good. Thanks for telling me. Hopefully you won't have to strain your ears too much now. That music. I think it depends on the song as well. Okay, so what do I do at Brace Yourself Games? So I'm working on Industries of Titan, which is a city building sim strategy game, and we're quite a small team, so everyone has to wear a lot of different hats, and so I'm kind of programmer first and foremost on the UI side of stuff, but then I'm also trying to help do the design of the UI, how should it be laid out, what kind of buttons do we need, stuff like that. So I'm getting to do more of the UX style stuff in this project. 28 says, as far as I know, UX includes everything about the experience, how a player takes it, but UI strictly about how you affect the game itself. I've heard of UX as definitely being broader than that, than just the visuals. So yeah, it would be the sound and the kind of the way that the buttons feel on the controller, or the way that you're interacting with the game, and kind of it's a much broader thing. But I don't know, the problem is that, like, if you look at it online, the definition becomes so broad, it kind of stops being so useful to me. Like, I've seen UX applied to like a brand, so you can say, oh, the user experience of like IKEA is from the second you hear the word IKEA and the feeling that invokes and the color scheme and then any kind of branding or any kind of products, all the way up to when you walk in the store and the smell of the store to the music they're playing. And it gets like really broad. But like within video games, yeah, so UI is how you affect the game itself. I always think of UI as more, it's like just the visuals. So it's just the art and the button colors and the kind of visual stuff. But yeah, everyone, as you say, yeah, everyone has completely different definitions for it. So I don't know. Those are my personal definitions. I don't know how useful that is. I guess all of these things, they're just there as tools to look at stuff. So the way you can, add, like, analyze UIs or like design a UI. I just see these things as like tools. It's like science is a way for looking at the real world. And they're all kind of, we don't necessarily know what like mass as a concept is in science, but we have all these different ways of viewing it. We're like, oh, mass is a little bit like this and it has these properties. So yeah, I kind of see UI UX stuff as that. Okay. So yeah, some pictures. If you're following the stream, I guess you probably know what Titan is, but these are some screenshots I put in for the presentation to just sort of, show people like what's the game. These are some pretty old screenshots, so there's some quite old UI in here. But yeah. So, just checking out. So Lily Paddle says, can a site be absolutely ugly but still easy to navigate? I guess it depends on what your definition of ugly is. I mean, you can have UIs that are very bare bones on the actual art side of it. So they're just literally like black and white buttons. But in a way, that's really clear. You can have like very simple flat UI. I mean, a lot of minimalist UI stuff kind of gets towards that direction. But like, yeah, it depends on what you mean by ugly. GeoCities works for many years. Yeah. It's very hard to tell sometimes, because sometimes there's like, if you get used to a certain ugliness, then it's not difficult for you. And especially if there are many sites that all have the same ugliness, you get used to it. Like, yeah, it's hard. It's like subjective stuff. Street Fighter 5 has ugly UI, but it works fine. Yeah, like I think as I've been looking at other games for analysis to analyze them, I think one of the sad things in a way about as a UI UX designer is like often even if the UI UX is bad, people don't really care, they don't really notice. Like if the game's playable, that's like first and foremost. And then I mean, if the UI is nice, it's nicer too, and people might enjoy it like, an extra 5% more. But at the end of the day, it's pretty rare that a UI will like break a game. Like people will put up with pretty annoying UIs if the game is enough to really pull them along. Like, I mean, indie games do that quite a lot because they don't have time to dedicate to that. They're making like the core gameplay experience, and the UI is just kind of like, oh, let's slap on some buttons and some stuff just to get the game working. So like what I'll talk about today about the UX is greater than on-screen stuff is to try and tell you that like, or to try and, I don't know, convince you that the UI in games doesn't have to just be about like throwing stuff on the screen so the players understand. I mean, there's a bit more that we can, if we think about the UI a bit more, we can kind of do a bit better and think about kind of the other aspects of the game, of the UI rather. 28 says, well, let's say more often than not, pretty stuff gets in the way of usability. Yeah, that's the other way of compensating. If you go really flashy, then in screenshots it can look amazing and you're like, wow, it's gorgeous, but yeah, 5 minutes in you're like, I can't tell what's going on anymore. And I've seen that as feedback from people, even about when we showed Titan at PAX, like a lot of the UI was kind of what I consider still rough, and so it was a little bit simple. I mean, going back to some of these screenshots, like there's not a lot of texture and there's not a lot of like quote unquote art to it. It's like simple outlines and things, but people were saying, well, it's actually quite easy to read that way. So I mean, yeah, simple can be beneficial. Okay, so let's get on to what I'm trying to talk about today. So thinking about like UI, the first thing I often think about is like, okay, when people hear about UI in games, they think of like, oh, it's everything that's not inside the game world. So in this example, from Luigi U Super Deluxe or whatever it's called, like you've got like your coins in the top left, you've got the time in the top right, you've got like a bunch of other UI elements. And so what you're trying to do here is like tell the player things. You're like, okay, you've got this many coins, you've got this much score, you've got this much time, and this is about as simple as it can kind of get for an in-game UI. Well, you've got this many lives, you've got some special coins. Like, these are just kind of, bits of UI. So, like, what's the goal in all of this stuff? So, I mean, just from like a simple perspective, you just think, well, all right, you've got, especially as a developer, you see the low-level stuff. This is before you've even made the UI. You've got your game simulation. So in my game, I've got a number of cakes, and I want to show that to the player somehow. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a UI element that has some nice font, and I'm just going to throw it on screen and say, look, you've got 42 cakes. Like, this is the game state. And then I'm just going to put that on screen, and hopefully that's going to go into the player's brain. Like, that's the player right there. That just floating brain in a jar. That's what the player is. So you think, like, yeah, that's good enough. Like, they can see what the state of the game is, and that's kind of what the Mario example was before. So yeah, that's what the goal is, right? Like, you know, if you put the information on screen, then the player gets hit, like, job done. But I think this kind of starts falling down quite quickly when you start thinking about more complicated examples. So even a slightly more complicated example is a health system. You've got like maximum health and current health of the player. And so you're like, okay, let's do the same thing again. We want to show that on screen to the player. So you've got like, oh, your current health, maximum health, those numbers can change. We'll put HP there just to try and like make it a little bit clearer what we're actually talking about in this situation. And then it goes into the player's brain. Job done. Like they can hopefully understand that the left number is health and the right number is max health. But then what about in this situation where they don't have a lot of health? Then you end up with play testing and the player like just dies and they don't understand like why they died. Or they're playing the game and they're like, well, am I okay? Like, how am I doing? They're like, oh, okay, well, so there's a problem with readability here. So you do some play tests and you think a bit and you're like, okay, well, we can do a percentage bar. So the player cares about, like, they're not really caring about how much health they have at this point. They're kind of caring more about, like, am I going to die? So you think, okay, well, to make that clear, let's go to like a percentage bar type thing. And we'll put the number up there of the current health. And max health is implicit. So you're like, okay, that's better. That's good. Players are kind of understanding, like, when they're close to dying. But quickly you get into other situations. You're like realizing there's more to the game than just what is in the numbers. So there's like other mechanics that will affect health. Oh, my face is in the way. Let's go to just the game. Can I do that? No, not that button. This one. Okay, I'm out of the way now. So you can see in the bottom left hand corner, I'll fade back in a second, but you can see that there's other stuff in your game. You've got like poison mechanics and how much enemies do damage and how much armor you might have. So in this case, while I've got 7 HP, if enemies only do 1 damage, then that kind of percentage bar is not really useful anymore. So you can see, like, already we're trying to, like, there's a lot of different aspects to the game that we're trying to convey in a single bit of UI. So there's just more to UI elements than just conveying like these individual kind of bits. So another aspect to it is player experience. So these are kind of the 3 things that I think are actually, when you talk about designing a UI, there's actually kind of like 3 bits. You've got what is the game state, which is the most obvious thing as a developer, and then you've got like the mechanics, which you're also trying to convey, and then you've also got the experience. So in this case, we're trying to tell the player, well, actually, when you think about what experience do we want the player to have? So when you're designing an app, there's no really experience in the same way as a game experience. You know, people use an app and they're trying to achieve some task. But with a game, you're trying to give a player an experience. So maybe that's a relaxing experience, maybe that's a stressful experience, maybe it's like a feeling of powerfulness. But you want to convey all of those through the UI, as well as the rest of the gameplay mechanics. So in this case, if we decide the experience we want the players to have is to be fairly carefree and not worry about their health until they get near death, then we could redesign the UI to just have like a red border around the outside when you get near to death. So like, you know, I'm trying to show here is the evolution of like, well, you know, you do have these simple numbers, but there's a lot more factors that you should take into account when you're designing your UI UX. Maybe that's obvious for some people, but yeah, I think it's stuff to bear in mind when you're designing a UI or a UX, a UI. So yeah, in like summary, I guess these are the kind of different aspects you have when you're designing the visuals of your game's UI. So to like take some more concrete examples, maybe this will make more sense with some real examples. So in the case of like classic Zelda, they've got a simple health system in the top left with just segments. So you just have like visible hearts. It's a really concrete, simple, well, I can read it from the top. Basically, you want a relaxed experience. So they're trying to avoid numbers. That if you really put that in numbers, if you think if every quarter could be a number like 1, then that would be 4 times 4. So those actually has 16 max health, but they don't show that. They just show like a heart. And because it's super easy to understand that at a glance, and it also works really well when you have like physical objects. So if you pick up a heart, then you like get +1 health, and that's super easy to understand. So like their health system and the design of the UI of their health system works with the gameplay experience they want and the gameplay mechanics. So it's a completely different comparison. Like JRPGs and kind of RPGs in general, it's all about like huge numbers. So, you know, Cloud's got like 5,000 XP at this point. Maybe they started out with like a couple of hundred XP, but you know, you're fighting Sephiroth, this is like the final battle. These kind of games are just all about feeling powerful. So the idea of the heart system wouldn't work at all here. You really want players to feel like, oh wow, I started out at like 200 HP and now I'm doing thousands and thousands of damage. And so like that fits with the experience players want to have. Yeah, you want the experience you want players to have. We get to ask questions about your career as games UX designer. Okay, yeah, sure, ask away later on. But yeah, probably a good time to ask and stuff like that is once I've finished this thing, then before I move on to the games, then yeah, ask away. And then yeah, as another comparison, I mean, these are just examples of health systems, but like you can go, based on the experience you want to have, you could go anywhere with it. These are just sort of examples that are fairly different. So in first-person shooters, modern first-person shooters, not like Doom, like newer stuff, basically all you want to communicate to players are get into cover. Like, when should you get into cover? So you just have this really vague indicator. You don't really know what 0% is, like death, because you know the blood is kind of like coming in more and more opaque. But it's this really simple visual indicator of like, are you safe or are you dying? And it works really well with regenerating health. Like if you had a health system where you picked up health packs and like the blood kind of like moved away, but then stayed there until you picked up enough health packs, that just wouldn't really work. The vagueness of it would actually be a detriment to that. So the experience here is you're trying to go for a certain experience. And then finally, like, this is another completely different example, is like survival horror games. So on the left you've got Resident Evil, and then the guy with the kind of flashing green is from Silent Hill. So while they're both slightly different experiences, they're still kind of like horror survival games. So there is under the hood a number between 0 and 100, especially for Resident Evil. There's like the concept, like so if you are over 50%, then it's yellow, and if you're over 75%, then it's green, and blah blah blah. But the point is, you want players to feel kind of scared and unsure, and healing items are rare, so people want to get the most out of them. So they'll kind of run they'll go right down to kind of like danger health and then heal up. If you had perfect accuracy about how much health players got from things and how much health the players had, then it wouldn't add to that experience of feeling scared or unsure. So like even, I don't know, people think of UI, UX, or UIs in general as like, it's this thing you throw on at the end. But I'm trying to show here that like that sort of design can actually help make the experience better. I mean, a lot of these things come out from iteration anyway. These guys might have thrown in a simple 0 to 100 number when they first started development, and then they kind of iterated to find this. And so it's hard to just look at the final result and say, oh, look, they're geniuses. I mean, it's good, they are geniuses, but like they probably had a lot of iteration to find this kind of really good solution. So yeah, in summary of this little section, so this showing the game state is kind of like, that's your step one. That's your basic thing, but you can actually do a lot more with your UI UX kind of design. You can show the mechanics of like, what's possible. So going back to the Mario example, there's like, he has, instead of just saying like you got a Luigi face and then X and then like 2, it actually says 0, 2 for the number of lives you have. And that kind of implies, or intuitively you're like, I guess maybe 99 is the maximum number I can have because there's 2 digits there. So yeah, hopefully that lets players understand like intuitively what the mechanics are through a single UI element. Like really good UI design can do that. Like players will just intuitively like understand so much about the entire system just through a single element. And the second aspect to that is like controlling the player's experience, as we saw with the previous set of like health bar systems. And that can guide how players will actually play. Like, will they be conservative with their health packs, or will they like just run around like and get take a lot of damage, stuff like that. So yeah, like basically how to achieve this, there's like a whole bunch of like tools that you can use to kind of analyze UI and think about UI and UX design. And when I say tools, I mean like not tools as in like software that you use, but more kind of tools for your brain, like brain tools. And yeah, unfortunately there's no one weird trick to UI UX design stuff. It's a very much a case of like you have a big toolbox of ways of thinking about stuff, and you sort of add more tools in as you learn things, and you take some out if they're not useful. And using the wrong tool in the wrong situation can make things worse, just like in real life. Like, you're trying to put up a painting, you don't use like a jackhammer and like smash down the wall. So it's kind of like that. So yeah, not tools like software, tools for your brain. And so yeah, you can just make up stuff like rules of thumb, things that work for you. Some of the ones I'm going to cover next are just things I've found or read online or like seen in talks, and they're just kind of things you keep in the back of your mind when you're like trying to solve a problem. You're like, okay, we need to convey this health system to the player. Okay, I've got all these ideas of like, all right, we need to keep this in mind when we design it. And then like, yeah, you just learn when to use them. IndieRx9 says, have you got UX ideas that don't fit with any project? Any project? I mean, I guess I don't know what example you'd mean. Like, there's certain cases where you have this idea, like, oh, I think this is a good concept, and you keep trying it out over and over again, and you're like, well, that doesn't really work, or that's not as important. It's usually it is kind of useful, but then it doesn't actually matter as much as you think. Like, there's some stuff where I guess we'll see in the examples later on. Like, I thought, oh, the color of the thing is really, really important, and players will have, like, if I make it red, they'll have all these associations with, like, oh, red means health, blah, blah, blah. But, like, sometimes players don't care so much about the color. They see the difference in color between stuff, but not, like, they don't, like, immediately think of 100 things to do with that one color. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to think about that stuff like that. So, new ideas. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head for, like, weird UX design ideas that don't fit with any project. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I guess games are quite good for that, for trying out new UI UX ideas, because you are trying to give players an experience. With apps and things, you're usually trying to get, people are trying to achieve something, like they're trying to, upload pictures of cats or something. But with a game, you can go really out there with like experiences that are just based on UI UX. Maybe I can think about that. Yeah, it's tough. Okay, so yeah, this is just trying to illustrate that, like, you know, when you're designing a new UI element, you have all these different tools and you kind of use those to try and design that. So let's get into some actual like examples of like kind of rules of thumb that I think are useful when you're designing, like when you're doing design. So use visual priority to guide the player's eye. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So when players are shown something, or when just as a human, you know, you look at something, you like see everything and understand everything on screen. So like just using this slide, for example, well, anyway, so they look at elements in an order based on the visual priority. And so yeah, there's a really good talk by Zach Gage where you can look into this in more detail. But like, so what do I mean by visual priority? So there's things like size, movement, contrast. So size, for example, if you look at this slide, what affects visual priority? That text is largest, so you look at it first. And it's also at the top, and it's also got more contrast with the background than the lower down gray text. So it's already ticked off like 2 of the bullet points there. And yeah, in the contrast point, though, one of the most important bits to understand about that is often this is presented as color, as you say, like, oh, if you want to catch the player's eye, like use a eye-catching color, and so you're like, oh, I'll use red or yellow. But the most important thing is the contrast. So if you make your entire UI yellow, nothing's going to stand out. So it's more about like contrast between things. So if your entire UI is yellow and you make one thing not yellow, that's what players will look at. And then shape. And there's 100 other like things in here. This gets into like a lot of kind of like cognitive psychology type stuff here about like what do humans kind of intuitively look at first. And there's a lot of kind of like evolutionary psychology of like, oh, we look at, you know, sharp shapes first because they're dangerous and they might hurt us, or we look at like, you know, red before we look at green because red is like danger and associated with like blood and scary stuff, and green is like leaves and safe. So there's like a lot of like cognitive psychology you could look into here. But like taking an example, this is the home screen of Overwatch. So like the biggest and the most contrasting thing on this is the character. So you're like, oh, I'm gonna look at the character first. So you look at the character, and then you sort of start scanning around and see what you see next. And then the next biggest things are the next most important things, which are like the name of the game and like the menu options that are most important and the character's name. And then finally you sort of start seeing the other parts of the UI, which is like the secondary menu items and some of the secondary information. And so when you're thinking about how should I lay out my page, or how should I even lay out a single kind of element, you want to lay things out in a way that is like makes sense. So the most important information is largest or most contrasting, and then you kind of gradually go down. Like if everything is the same visual importance, then players just have to read it all, and that gets really tiring. Like if all of these menu items were all the same size, you wouldn't know that options is less important than play. So they basically, you're telling the players like what's important right now and what's okay is like a secondary thing. NDR X9 says companies like Nintendo seem to get things just right from the start. I wonder, like, because they don't expose a lot of their development process. The stuff they release is incredibly polished because they have such a high standard. So like there's a bunch of random people. That's cool. That's fun. So like there's like a whole, they look at like basically they only release the most important stuff. Cool. This is fun. I don't know quite what this is going on. There's lots of people joining the chat. But yeah, welcome. I'm talking about UI UX design. So yeah, I guess that's the most important thing, is just thinking about like the priority of stuff. So one other way you can test it, I showed before, like you can kind of, I was just showing I hid away certain important, less important things. But one way to like test out your UI design to see what is most readable is you just make it really small. So you're like, okay, at a distance, you can do this by half closing your eyes. But okay, the character's really readable, and then the next thing you see at this sort of size is like, oh, I can read the text, the larger text at this size, and then finally I can read the smallest text. So like when you've got like a mock-up of what your UI is, then you can kind of test out like, is it readable? Is it really clear? Like what's the most readable thing, and then what's the second most readable thing, and the third most readable thing. So yeah, it's fun. So that's pretty much it about hierarchy. So moving on to like another way of looking at UI UX stuff. There's, you minimizing related information distance. So like you often have like lots of UI elements like around on the screen, and you often end up needing to compare things or look at multiple things at the same time. So for example, if we have a mock here of like a shop, you have like a subtotal of all the things you've bought, and here's how much it's going to cost you. And in normal gameplay, you have the current amount of coins that the player has like in the top left. And so if you're working out like, do I have enough money, or am I spending all of my money? Like, is this a lot? Can I afford this? The player is going to be looking like top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right, like this all the time. And that gets really tiring. So like you should probably put the stuff that's related to each other like right next to it. That seems like a kind of simple but kind of contrived example. To use a real example, I'll go back to that slide in a second. So this is one of the Anno games. So in this game, there's like a lot of information on the screen, and right now I'm focusing on the bottom left-hand side, so the bit I'm right in front of. There we go, the bottom left-hand side. So you're trying to work out like, do I have enough resources? Oh, some of them are minus numbers, that's bad. Okay, so the beans, I've got -2 beans, like in the bottom left-hand corner. So, I want to make more beans. So the way you build those is you click on the button just above it, and then you have to search for that beans icon, like in this menu, and you have to remember like, okay, I need beans, I got to search along it. And so these two bits of information are like related. What do I need more of, and how do I build it? And they're kind of like, they're too far away from each other, and so you're kind of overloading the player's brain this way. They have to think about like, keep stuff in memory and then move to somewhere else. So the distance I'm talking about is like, you should minimize the distance. The distance is in space and time. So like when you're clicking between menus, that's kind of time, because you have to keep it in your brain while you move to another menu. And then space was the example like here, where you have to like look from the top left to the bottom right all the time. So I mean, some of these seem obvious when in context, because you're like, oh well, obviously you put stuff that's related to each other nearby, but I don't know. It's enough that these little annoyances can kind of wear the player down. So yeah, put related information nearby, even if it's duplicated. Larkin says UX designers are absolute geniuses. Oh, thank you. It's very, very kind. Thanks for coming in. Have a good time in Japan. So those are some examples. This is another example of like how to do related information well. So it's the city skylines, and so the player is trying to lay out some power information. So when they're building power stuff, all of the information they need is on the same screen. So what's their consumption? What's the production? So that's shown in a nice bar in the top. Oops, let me pop this up back here. There we go. So that's shown in a nice bar in the top left-hand corner. And I can use my mouse. I don't know if that's visible. But yeah, in the top left-hand corner, you can see this bar. And then also showing where the electricity extends to is shown on the same screen. So it seems obvious, but they could have made it such that you have to like go into electricity view and work out where electricity is extending to, and then go into build view, and those things wouldn't like compare. Oh, thanks for subscribing, Larkin. That's great. So like they do it pretty well here. Like they put all the information you need in one screen. Okay, so this is kind of a related point. So if the player is doing two things together quite often, you should try and minimize the distance between them. So the actions would be like pressing a button or trying to build something, or I don't know, trying to interact in the game in a certain way. If they always do action A and then they want to do action B, if it takes them like a minute to go between them, or like 7 or 8 button clicks, they're going to get annoyed. So I've seen some reviews of, I think the most recent game, Anthem, has some problems with that, where it's like, okay, you get some new armor and you're like, sweet, I got armor, but the time between you getting new equipment and actually putting it on, I think maybe they've changed it now, but originally it was a couple of minutes. You had to like go back to your home base, wait for a load screen, go to a certain area within the base, wait for another load screen, and then get to your kind of storage and then put on the new armor. And so those actions are really related. Like, get new stuff and wear new stuff. Like, those should be like really next to each other. They should be like 10 seconds apart and like 2 or 3 button presses. And you can usually tell these things. If players are trying to do this all the time, you need to like realize what they're trying to do and then try and put those together and try and smooth that out as much as possible. So to take a concrete example, so maybe play Dawn of Man later on, but like this is an example of like building. So okay, I want to build 2 things. So I click on the build menu, I click on the production category, I click on the thing I want to build, so skin strier, and then I put it down. That's fine. That seems fairly logical. But then I want to build a second thing, and so I have to click build again, I have to click production category again, and then I click a different thing, because it automatically kind of closes all these menus out. So that's like, it sounds like not a lot, but when you're doing it over and over again over a period of number of hours, it wears you down a little bit. It's not enough to like ruin the experience, because it's still a really great game, but it's like little inconveniences like that, things that by thinking about kind of the user experience, you can kind of smooth those out for the player and make it a little bit more enjoyable. So yeah, I guess if anybody has any questions about these points, then yeah, let me know. So the next kind of tool or way of thinking about stuff is to be conscious of like existing player knowledge. So like when players come to play your game, they come with like a whole bunch of like knowledge and baggage and stuff. Like they're not, blank slates. They come from a particular cultural background and they have a linguistic background. They've played a whole bunch of other games probably, although not necessarily. And they've used other software. They've, dealt with buttons and interactions and stuff in real life. And so there's like a lot of existing kind of ideas they come to your game with. And so if your game is like completely at odds with all of this, then it's going to make it harder to learn. So that could be, for example, like symbol meanings. So the simplest thing, for example, here is like, okay, in the West, generally those top 2 icons mean yes and no, or good and bad, or confirm and cancel. But in Japan, the bottom 2 is what they use for like confirm and cancel. And so you see this when you play PlayStation games. In Japan, circle, which is the right-hand button, is like confirm, and X is cancel, and that makes total sense. And then in the West, like there is no tick thing, so they put it as the bottommost one, which seems to make sense, which is X, or cross, I think they call it. And so for a Japanese person, that makes absolutely no sense. Like, why is the no icon confirm? But in the West, you're just like, well, the bottommost one is the easiest place to put my thumb, and so that's confirm, because you don't have the idea of circle being like okay, confirm. So yeah, I have another example of that in a second. But yeah, like color associations, like green is go and red is stop. Like if you had green to mean like turn off, that would be incredibly confusing for a lot of people, but not necessarily all people, because not all cultures have those associations. Input conventions is another classic thing. Like if you push up on the stick, does it make your view go down or up? If you right click on something, is that like go, or is that like cancel? And so a lot of the time you have to make a default choice for this, but then let players can like change those defaults if they're not what they want. But you still have to be aware of this, because it's going to apply to all over the place and apply in situations that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Text semantics is like, okay, if you say bank, like what do you mean by bank? Like bank as in like a bank of a river, or a financial institution, or like the verb to bank, or what do you mean? Or turn, like banking like a plane, So like people, depending on whether the English is their first language or which kind of English is their first language or all these other things, are going to interpret those in different ways. And so you have to be kind of like knowledge of that. Where's square and triangle? Yeah, this is kind of a weird PlayStation controller. So it's not quite what you'd expect. Circle means the same as 0 in Japan. Yeah, it can kind of mean like, yeah, nothing. But it also means confirmed. So I mean, even within the same culture, like these symbols can mean multiple things. And so based on context, maybe if you saw a circle next to a 1, you'd be like, oh, maybe that's on or off, or maybe that's like, yeah, I don't know. It'd be really confusing. Yes, we can use the word circle when they say 0. Oh, you mean like maru? It's like, yeah, maru. And that's like circle, you know. It's true. So like in the, going back to that like X example, this is an options menu from Banished. So they're using this X as a checkbox icon here, but like it's not enough to be confusing and unusable. But when I saw this, I'm like, okay, X means no, but here X means yes, if it's like a white X versus a grayed out X. So it's a really tiny thing, but it's enough that it makes me sort of take an extra split second to kind of understand what's going on here. So like symbols have, yeah, meanings, and so you could make it a check mark, or you could make it an O, or you could do some other way of conveying on off. Like I think on iOS they have like a kind of a visual representation of like a sliding button, and then like a green to mean yes, because I guess that's fairly culturally independent. But yeah, it's always tough. You're going to have to like, it's very difficult to make a UI that caters to absolutely everything. So you have to try and pick like the largest group, and then hopefully add extra options to cater for other groups, so they're not like completely excluded. Yeah. So this is kind of going back to that other diagram I had before. There's like another layer to it, because this diagram's not complicated enough as it is. So you have all that desired player experience, and that you use all those kind of 3 things on the left-hand side to drive what your UI visuals could be. But then the way the players interpret it is what they see in the game, plus all their existing knowledge. So they might see a UI element and you think, oh, it's totally obvious they'll interpret this UI element one way. But no, they take that and then they take all their existing knowledge and they put those together, and then they come up with an idea of what that UI element means. So that in this case, I'm like, okay, I see an X, but then I think X means no, so I'm going to interpret it in a slightly different way. So like, yeah, this diagram gets more and more complicated the more you think about it. It's part of the problem with UX, is there's just like a million different aspects to it. Okay, so that's enough with symbols and stuff. So this is kind of, I think this is the final kind of tool. There's like, there's way too many to go on for forever, but this is like another kind of useful one, I think, that I've hit recently. So I talk about using multiple modalities to convey information in a better way. So like this, imagine this is like a build menu or some sort of menu with buttons on it. So you're like, okay, I've got 4 options here of food and defense and horses and robotics. Okay, sure. Like as a player, you can read those if your English is good enough, and you might vaguely understand what it means. But at a glance, you still can't like easily remember where things are. Like I know a lot of games where I play stuff, I can play them for like 30 hours and I'll still forget. I'm like, wait, is it the 3rd button along that's horses, or is it the 4th one? And I'm kind of like searching along visually, like, and I have to manually like read each option. And that's because you're just using one modality. I don't know if that's really the right word, but you're just using text. So you might think like, oh, okay, text is annoying to read, so let's do icons instead. So you're like, okay, if you saw the icons without the text example, you'd be like, okay, apple? Like, is that even look like an apple? It looks like a face. Or maybe that's something to do with food. I guess that's a shield on the second one. Is the 3rd one about like Trojan horses? Like, what are we talking about here? So even that modality alone is like confusing. So you could be like, oh, well, it's because the color is not helping, so we'll add some color. But you're still kind of only using one modality. You've got color and you've got shape here, which is kind of helping, but it's still like not enough, I'd say. So you kind of add them all together, and this becomes like way easier to remember, because you can visually scan along and go like, oh, the yellow one. Like a lot of time in games, I don't actually remember what the icon is. I just kind of remember the color. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's the red one. And if someone asked me what the red one was, I wouldn't necessarily remember. I'd be like, oh, it's to do with food. Is it meat? Oh, it's red. Maybe it's an apple. I can't remember. It's the red one. It's fine. So like here we've got like 3 different modalities of like presenting the information. We've got text, and we've got color, and we've got like iconography, I guess is the right word for it. So you can even take it further, and you can actually just color the whole button and just say, oh, then players can see even more at a glance, like, oh, it's the purple button, because horse and robotics there are like the same color. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so year 28's already picked that up because they're already the same color. So if you just had this example, horses and robotics are like both gray. So robotics could be purple or something totally unused that's not yellow or red. So I tried to adjust that with like background color. But yeah, you're right. The icon should be different. So I think like generally if you try and rely on one modality, it's not enough. You should try and pick 2 or 3. I mean, and convey the information that way, because players can read that information way better. I mean, these are not like use this one trick and your UI is going to be perfect. It's more like when you're designing a single element or a page, you have to keep all these things in the back of your mind and use those to make the UI better. This is an example I think that does it really well. This is Northgard. Yeah, sorry. And so in their example in the very top here, you've got apples are in red, so that's nice and clear, and they reuse that logo absolutely everywhere. And like wood is used around, and they kind of use they could do better with maybe the shape, because these all kind of look like that same shape. They do have a little bit of an outline around them, so that helps. But they're all quite, well, wood and stone are kind of like the same color. So I mean, even then you could say there's room for improvement. Like maybe they could make stone, but stone would be grey, and then it'd be. So yeah, it's difficult to kind of do a perfect example here. But yeah, like down here they've got they've got an icon and they've got the text, so that's like 2 modalities, I guess. So yeah, that's pretty much it for like tools. There's like many other ways of like viewing UI and UX and kind of thinking about them. So I mean, if you guys had any more questions about like, I don't know, career stuff, now would be a good time. Like I can start kind of looking at firing up the games and stuff. Yeah. Do you think pre-learned universal standards should always be used instead of a superior but specific solution that requires new learning? Most opinion I read suggests so. Oh, it's pretty specific. Pre-learned universal standards. So I guess that would be like players that come to your game with an idea of like, what does, I don't know, the exit sign look like, or what's the icon for? I guess it would have to be really universal. I don't know what universal standards there would be. Like green is go, I guess, is pretty universal. But a superior but specific solution that requires new learning. I think the problem with the new learning is that takes time. So if you have only 1 or 2 of those and the rest of the game kind of clarifies that. If you're like, okay, I want, in my game, yellow means go. Like, and you really want yellow to mean go. If you have like a whole bunch of other things like kind of clarifying that yellow means go in your game, then I think players will get over that initial learning hump, and they will sort of after a while learn like, oh, when I'm playing in this world, green means like yellow means go. For example, anyone that's ever used Windows knows that top right X is closed window, except on Mac it's, wait, is it top right? I thought it was top left for a while. Anyway, is there a point where people become so accustomed to something it's not worth changing? Yeah, I agree. Like, top right is where closed window goes. Like, I mean, you could put it top left, but you're going to annoy players, and I don't know, I guess you have to think, like, is that really worth the experience of the game? Like, if it was something really integral to your experience, like, I don't know, health bars always go left to right instead of right to left, or health, or some very specific choice, it has to be, like, justified. This is really integral to the experience I want the players to have. So I was thinking about one example, like, so going back to, like, start menus and stuff, usually the start game or play game or continue is the topmost item because it's the most important thing, it's the one they do most, and then exit is at the bottom. You could flip that, but you'd have to have a really good reason to. You'd have to make start game be right at the bottom and exit be at the top. And also you'd have to have a reason. You could be like, okay, the game is all about going down. like downwell or something. So start game at the bottom makes sense, and exit game at the top makes sense. But you have to have like a really good reasoning. You'd have to really guide the player. You'd have to make start game like massive at the bottom and exit game be really small at the top, or tween them in to try and really guide the player about like, okay, we're going down. The whole game's about going down. Like, so I think there's some cases where you can break those like universal rules, but you have to, you have to justify them or make it worthwhile, because I guess players will just get annoyed otherwise. Flipping it would make it awfully easy to accidentally click exit. Yeah. So maybe you'd put exit top right, or you'd have to have some way of doing that. But I mean, a reason. Like, you're setting yourself up for more difficulty. The more you fit to a standard, the more you're going to, the more players are going to have like just a fairly easy experience out of the box. 4-Bit Variety says, in my game I run into an issue where people are expecting down plus jump to drop them through platforms, but it's high jump instead. It requires a bit of getting used to, but I think the cost of learning is prohibitive enough to change it. Oh, you don't think the cost of learning is prohibitive enough to change it? And there is a reason for it. Down jump is something that I've seen in a lot of games, to go down through platforms. That's really tricky, because I'm used to doing games that are all about menus and buttons and stuff, so you usually have a lot of space to just like label things and people click on them. But when it's something that's based on controller input, you either have to just like heavy tutorialize that, which is not ideal, and then be like, oh, press down and jump to like high jump. But like, cost of learning, I guess you just have to play test it. If 80-90% of your players are like, I really hate this, like, you either change it or you put an option in the menu to flip it to something that they prefer. I don't know, it's tough. Maybe chatting with, this is sort of, before I jump into some games, I figured if anybody had any questions, they can ask me stuff now. I guess down is the last thing someone thinks when they're going to go up more. Have you tried like long press or up press jump, or you say there's a reason for it? I guess you either show the players the reason for it earlier on, so that they're like, they understand your logic, and unless it's like the twist of the game is that down press jump is like core to the experience. So I could talk about this stuff all day. I think it's really useful, really interesting. I'm going to start up a game, and then we can, I don't know, talk more about UX. Let's just keep talking about UX forever, all day, every day. Okay, Mei Chang says, awesome. What's the difference between games and industry standard UX design? You do a web app. I'm a UX designer looking to get into games. I'm definitely familiar with a lot of the stuff you said and wondering how to bridge the gap. I don't know. So, articles and things I've read about UX design they're more often from wider industry stuff, like, as you say, apps, web, even print media and stuff. There's not a huge amount of stuff on games UX, because in games UX, it sort of blurs the line between gameplay and UX. Like, your example of like down press jump is sort of UI UX. It's sort of just core gameplay mechanics. But I haven't worked in general industry, so like, I guess the difference with it to me, from what little I understand, is that in games you're trying to give players a really specific experience. So you can actually, as we've been talking, you can break some of the kind of like standard UX that you wouldn't really have reason to break in apps or web. Like, apps and web, you're kind of like, players, users will only jump into your app for like, or website for like, I don't know, a couple of minutes. If they really love it, they might spend an hour or two in there, but they'll be bouncing between their real life and the app and coming back to it every so often. So it's harder to build up like a really big, cohesive, different set of rules. Like, if they're playing a game, people play games for like hundreds of hours, and they're usually in it for like an hour or two. So you can get quite creative and kind of out there with your user experience. Games that are more casual, like a mobile game, you see much more conservative UX UI design there, because they know their users are not going to be, I don't know, they're not necessarily as savvy about game design stuff, and they're going to be bouncing between like playing the game and going back to like real life. So you see much more normal UX design there. So I guess, like, you can go much more wacky and out there with UX UI design stuff in games, I think, because you have that world you're building, that experience you're trying to give, which is freeing, but it also gives you a lot more room to shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Do you have an opinion on the UI's inherent artistic value over it being just a cold functional thing? Most modern games to shift towards the latter. Yeah, I think it depends on, I guess what the purpose is. I think UIs can be beautiful. Like there are certain games that have like really fantastic UI, like Frostpunk is pretty gorgeous, and there are some like console games that have really amazing stuff, but it's hard to go really fancy with UI if your players are not super savvy or they don't have time to invest in learning stuff. And I think, the games shifting towards the latter is because you have a lot of, while people think of like Call of Duty and things as like, hardcore games, people who play them, they just play them to have fun with their friends and to get a certain experience. They're not like there for like, I don't know, experiencing a new UI experience or like some artistic vision. They're there to like have fun and blow stuff up. So the UI shifts way more into the background because it's it's not the focus of the game, and that's fine. Like people often say like a good UI is something you don't even notice, and I think that's often pretty true. Like if it doesn't annoy the player, it's usually a good start. Now for 7 says, one thing I can tell about industry standard is that you can't break user habits. Games have reason to do things that business apps, you have to preserve. That's kind of what I was saying, I think, is that they'll just ask you like, why are you trying to like put the X in a different place, and you can't really justify it by saying, well, I'm trying to give the business user this wonderful like narrative experience. Like you can't really do that. The difference UX designers kind of like gameplay designers, not the code. I mean, UX designers, you could just do the UX designer not touch any code, and gameplay designers could not touch any code. I mean, that's one of the things about the roles is you could, especially in indie, you can design the role how you feel is appropriate and what your skills are and what you're interested in. Trying to think. I think in video games, like there's a lot more dialogue between the UX designer and the gameplay designer, because it's one of the things I love about working at Brace Yourself is that because it's such a small team, I can say like, okay, so you want this game design, I could think of like presenting it in this way. That's going to be a little bit tricky, or that might be hard, or it might be, if we could change the game design in like a, one small way, that would make the UI like amazingly easy to understand. And so there is that opportunity for like dialogue, which I don't know that you would have in like a business app or some other wider app. Like you have to just solve the problem. Like if they want 400 options, you have to support 400 options. But in games, you could be like, well, 400's too many, let's try 40. Like that's more achievable. I have a UI for a city builder that has buttons in nested menus. A button either opens a menu with more button or lets you build something. Progfix, having like a list of like a toolbar of like most frequently like tools they want could be useful. That sounds like something that only a power user or someone who knows that that's a feature would actually use. So you have to be a bit careful with like trying to support like power users, because I think a lot of players won't even know that's an option, and so if the experience is bad out of the box, people won't even get to that whole like dragging options to a toolbar. I mean, ideally you would make your UI so good that the default behavior wouldn't even need them to have a toolbar of shortcuts. Like if the pop-out menu system is less tricky, then you wouldn't even need extra shortcuts. So, I don't know. Oh yeah, Personas. Yeah, Persona is like just another level of UI UX design. It's probably one of the most flashy things I've seen in forever. Like I really would want to know how their workflow is, like, because it's gorgeous. It's kind of too showy from what I've seen. I don't know quite how annoying it is, because it's like tweening between every single menu, and it seems like maybe a little bit of hassle, but it's so gorgeous. Maybe you're just watching it entranced. So it's probably fine. But it's gorgeous. Okay, let's talk about some game stuff. I mean, you guys can keep asking questions. I'll talk about this for another little bit, half hour or whatever. So let me turn off the music. How's that? I guess you can hear the music. It's too loud. feel that hotbars made a bit of resurgence on Minecraft. A lot more players get them now, especially ones requiring you to juggle. Yeah, when you have like an inventory-based game, yeah, I think it's pretty common to have like the most recently used. How about that? That's probably better. Yeah, like most recently useful. I mean, it depends on your game. This is the problem. It's hard to come up with like, oh, this is the UI solution that works for everything, because it totally depends on your game. Any thoughts on moving UI functions to an in-game world stuff like Dead Space? Yeah, that can totally work for some games. I mean, you limit yourself in the amount of detail you can put into those in-world things, but you add to the immersiveness. I mean, I think it can work. There's not a lot of games that have done it, and I think for good reason, because to pull it off well is hard. Dead Space does it quite well because they really pull the camera in, and it makes it clear that, like, I'm pretty sure it doesn't pause the game while you're doing UI menu stuff, and that fits. Like, usually if you pull up a UI menu, you assume it pauses the game. Dark Souls is like one of the few exceptions to that, I think. But having it in world makes it clear that you can't just pause the game and like mess with your items, because the enemies they're gonna kill you like while that's happening, and that like really fits together there. I feel that. Oh yeah, stuff that makes this. That has pause. You don't super need that. I mean, you're basically wasting the player's time rather than wasting like in-game time, which is slightly different. You want to grow a favorite open quickly. Yeah, actually, no, that's a good point, Artyom. Like, Astroneer does actually do in-world UI like Dead Space, and does it really well. It's yeah, that's a good example of like a more recent thing. That game's all about physical clickiness and things expanding and contracting. Like, it's amazing how much they kind of break physical rules, but you don't really care. Like, something that's this big in the real world like expands to contract to like a small thing that fits in your backpack, but it just does it so smoothly and feels so good. Like, yeah, it's great. Backpack scales up. Yeah, it's I could talk about. I love Astroneer. It's absolutely gorgeous. The sound effects are amazing, and that clicky feel and the art style makes it feel like you're playing with like plastic Lego stuff. Oh, I thought I turned off the Titan music. Oh, I didn't. Okay, let me do that. There we go. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so let's look at Dawn of Man. So this is kind of like the new game from the guys who made Planet Base, which is also like kind of a really fun like little indie game. So they made it really clear, like the UI, hover state. Like, it's really clear when you're hovering over stuff, and these are clearly disabled because there's no hover state. Like, it's really like bread and butter basic stuff, but it's really simple. They don't change the mouse cursor when you hover over stuff, which is kind of nice sometimes, but I mean, there's enough feedback on the settings on the button that it doesn't really make a big difference. And little tooltips. It's great. So you don't even have to click on it. I was looking at the settings menu. Oh, okay, that's how they've done their. Because it's always tricky. Like, how do you do options, like multiple options? They haven't done like a drop-down box. They've done like sort of pan through arrows. That's fine. That works. And they put back in the bottom left because people read left to right if you're from the West. I mean, there are a lot of right to left languages, so there's a case for like making the whole UI flipped if you're a right to left language reader. But I don't know there's a lot of games that do that. This is a lot of work. But I mean, if you really had the time and money, you should do that because players enjoy it. Okay. I don't want to play the tutorial, I played this at home. Ooh, tooltips. Oh, so it makes it clear like what the extra stuff is and what the current state is, and like what you're going to be achieving. I guess these are like tabs for like moving between stuff. It's kind of interesting. Ooh, hover states. Do you have some personal fave UIs you can remember? I like Northgard because it's really simple. And efficient, and it doesn't really annoy me too much. I'm trying to think for like other genres. There's like Colin McRae early games have like ridiculously smooth UI for the time. Like some of the PlayStation 2 era, like Colin McRae rally games were pretty good. Wipeout 3 on PlayStation 1, that was like, I mean, that was done by the Designers Republic, who were like an actual design agency, so like that was just head and shoulders above anything of its time. I guess I'm sort of showing my age by some of these things. They're kind of old. Ooh. So I mean, they're showing that this is like clickable because it's super hoverable, and then it's like contrasting style with the background. It's clearly like a UI element. But you wouldn't... It did take me a while to notice these first time around, so you could... It's not super clear. They don't tween them in or anything. Oh, it picks a different one every time though. Does it? Yeah, it does. So it's kind of interesting. Let's give it a go. So yeah, they've done something which I really like in games where they actually highlight certain keywords with different colors. Because if that was all one text, you wouldn't read that as quickly as you can with contrasting information. So like, if you, at a glance, like in a split second, I just see avoid healthy adult early game. Those are like the 3 core concepts of that sentence. And so I don't even have to read all the other glue words. My brain is enough to, I can just, yeah, I don't have to even read the rest of it. So like stuff like that I find makes large amounts of text like 100 times more readable. It's so useful. I should have put that in my presentation. Ooh. So like this is the classic builder menu, is like you throw all of that kind of build stuff at the bottom. Although this isn't, it's kind of nested. The interesting thing about this game is that they have like a kind of customizable UI, which not a lot of other games do. So you click on these and then you can kind of choose what you actually want to show here. Even though you can just duplicate the information, which is kind of fun. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but they decided to let you do that. So like it's kind of cool because you can pick what's most important to you. Be like, oh, I want a food chart because that's important. Ooh, looks like they got a little bug here. And you can be like, oh, I want to have grouped resources instead of this regular resources panel. Ooh, oops, found some bugs. Can't see your toolbar. Oh yeah, okay, that's going to be kind of annoying. Oh, yeah, it all gets hidden under the banner. Whoops. I can't move that. I could hide the banner, but then I'm going to hide my face, and you guys all want to see my face. Let's go to... Is there a reason why we look at this game in particular? I think... So, it's a game I've been playing most recently, and I think one of the most useful things to play in games is... Obviously, it's great to play the really, really polished games, because those the ones with like the highest budget and the most experienced developers working on them, because it kind of shows you how good UI UX can be. But a lot of the time with those, it's hard to pick apart like why it's good. Like if you play something like Overwatch or like any kind of AAA game, I mean Hearthstone, the UI in that is just like phenomenal. I mean the UI and the gameplay experience kind of blend together. But anyway, it's hard to pick apart like why it's amazing. But if you play like a very like cheap kind of student game, like they don't have a lot of experience, so it's like, you know, there's almost too many problems with it. But like with something like this, where it's like really popular, they know what they're doing, it's like good sort of mid-tier AA. I mean, this is only made by 2 people, but like they have great stuff, but then they also have room for improvement. And so you can see the bits that when you play it kind of are a little bit hard for yourself as a new player to understand. You can realize like what's good, what's copy, and then what to kind of avoid. So I kind of like playing these kind of, I don't know, indie-ish games. So for example here, like I showed in my presentation, like one of the annoying things is like having to, when you build, I'm gonna hide my face for a second here just to show the build menu. So to build something, I have to click build, and then I'm presented with that. The menu changes from underneath my mouse, which is kind of annoying. And the back button's over here. Although there is a keyboard shortcut, but as a basic user, I'm not going to know that. So then I have to choose from a category, and then I have to choose a thing from within that. So that's like one click for build, one click for the category, and then one final click for the item. And then you see the menu has actually been closed at the bottom there. So like if I want to build 2 houses, I can hold down shift, and so I don't have to do it again. But if I'm a new user, I won't have noticed that. So I'm just going to do that over and over again. So it's kind of like a little bit annoying, let's say. And often I'm thinking about what I said before in the presentation about the like minimum distance between related actions. Often I'll kind of go off and do some stuff. I'll like, set up some hunting and maybe chop down some trees. And then I'll realize like, oh, I want to do some building. So I'll come back to my little houses and I'll want to build multiple stuff. I'll be like, okay, so I want a rock pile. Oops. Oh, and I messed up. So it deselected it. So I have to do the same thing again. Oh no, rock pile is in storage because we've just got an icon here. There's no color and there's no text until I hover over it. I've played this game for like 4 or 5 hours and I still forget the order that these are in. So I click on storage. Okay, I want a rock pile. So I click there. And then I'm like, okay, I also want a drying rack. Okay, skins dryer. So I'm going to put that there. And so it's like a lot of clicks for like related stuff. So it'd be kind of nice if there was like a dedicated build menu or like some way of sort of keeping this open or showing the context of like, okay, here's the build menu, and then you pop out the other category menu, and then you pop out the other menu, and then you can kind of see where you are. It gives you more context and stuff like that. Like the rest of the game's like great. It's just like some of the UI stuff. I mean, there's only 2 developers, but like some of that could be a little bit nicer. But again, one of the things about UI UX is like people will still play it and enjoy it. It's just like a really minor, I don't know, wrinkle that's kind of a little bit annoying. If categories have to pop up, I prefer them to slide in from the previous list, with the previous list perhaps locking, but definitely going away. Yeah, that's kind of exactly what I was thinking. It's like stuff kind of, you see the previous thing and things sort of slide out. So the first you have a toolbar with a build option. After clicking it, another panel sounds out above it, and then it contains categories, and yeah, it's kind of, yeah. Artyom works at Brace Yourself, so we're all on the same. It's good. He works on Phantom Brigade, and their UI is amazing. Like Artyom's the UI guy on their stuff, and it's unbiased. I know it's made in house, but I like it. So one other thing with these is like you have information here of like, okay, I can't place it here. That's good. It's showing me the current state, but like, it doesn't really tell you where I can place it. So I have to do this thing that I call sniffing. So I'm like sniffing around here to be like, oh, where can I place it? And you sort of blindly sniff around. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want to show like the entire UI like ground in green and red, because that would look really gamey, and you want to like hide the you wouldn't want to show the whole ground in green with red bits, but you could have a thing where it's like, okay, so it shows you the green and red area like around your mouse, so you don't have to sniff blindly. It shows you somewhere nearby. There's some other options for like that. Sign to use app says, hi, did you know the UI is customizable with the plus icons? Yes, I did. Oh yeah, these plus icons. I was hoping that you were saying that this down here is customizable. But yeah, like these guys are customizable. I like this. I really like the food chart. I wish a lot of other survival games had that, because it's like, a lot of the time you don't really care about food until you get low, and it's nice to see that trending down, because they have little things saying, oh, you don't have fuel, but usually by that point it's too late. So seeing it trend down is almost as useful as being told there's no food. There's a lot of icons at the top left that make no sense to me. Do you go through a food tutorial? Yes, there is a tutorial, so I am skipping it here, but like it. And this is kind of an information window, so they'd say this is secondary to like the actual gameplay stuff. And they've put the most important stuff on the left, which is good, because I mean, it's like assuming you're a left to right reader. Yeah. What window sizes do you design your UIs for? I mean, if you're doing a full screen game, which I guess most of the time you are, 1080p is sort of the standard-ish, but you should probably support 720. It depends if you're doing a PC game or a console game or another game or like a mobile game. And then yeah, you can kind of, as the resolution gets bigger, you can kind of 1.5 multiply or 2 times multiply your UI, so it takes up roughly the same amount of screen space. And then maybe you can let users like scale that. If they really want to play at like 4K with like a 1x resolution UI, you can probably let them do that. Yeah. It's just a case of testing out. You really need to like test your game at different resolutions and make sure stuff doesn't get like squished or stretched so small that you can't see it. What other UI stuff we got here? Ooh, they got colors for icons. That's good. So it's way more readable. Although all these are it's always a balance between like how much color you throw in your UI. Like you could try and make unique-ish colors for like every single element, but then the UI is going to look like kind of rainbow, and if it doesn't really fit the theme of your game, it's kind of hard to choose. 21 by 9. Yeah, I need to look at how our game works at what super widescreen resolutions. You see, when you say black bars, I guess you're saying you like have it black bars on the side, so it's like squished in, or it's hard with those. Someone in-house tested our game at the full widescreen, and everything was kind of docked in the far corners, which was kind of annoying from a UI perspective, so I got to work on supporting that, so the UI kind of hovers more towards the center, but the game world actually like fills the full screen. So yeah. I don't know what else we can talk about with this, really. If you guys have any questions, they've got tooltips and everything. It's great. And was it new shelter space? Like, it's all readable. They make stuff that's not applicable in like semi-transparent, so that's cool. Some games that can't fit or implement a graph for stats, like that food window, also use a small alternative. Are they able showing the speed of change? Oh yeah, that's a good point, Artyom. Yeah, so if your cache is some huge amount, but it's got a negative tick rate on it, then you know to like, oh, I better address that. Like that's important. And so yeah, a lot of the time in the games you have to really think hard about what's important for players to understand. Like, do they care more about what's in stock, or do they care more about the diff, like what the changes, or both? So you have to kind of think about stuff like that. Did you play Banished? Yeah, I played way too much Banished. I love Banished. Like, as much as the UI is clunky looking, it does the job. Like, it takes a while to get used to, but I mean, it does remind me of this a bit in that it's kind of simple colors. It feels like playing like a Windows 95 kind of era game, which I kind of like. That's nice they show here where your people can go in and out from, like green being good, and like arrows pointing outwards. You're like, oh, I guess this is where people come out from. Like, it's pretty clear. I find it interesting that Forest Village copied up from Banished to this game to Forest Village UI. Oh, I've not seen Forest Village. Yeah, they use different colors here for like highlighting stuff. I guess we can look at another game as well, but I think I find these interesting because it's like, you think of ways that you could do stuff differently. Like, I'd maybe have some of these have have text on them, and maybe some color as well. Whoa. Oh, so this is how. So in the game you actually learn stuff as you kill animals, as you like build structures and stuff. And you get knowledge, which is kind of like for unlocking tech trees. And this is actually a way I didn't know that there was a way of looking at this, because I was just blindly doing like, I'm just gonna keep building hearths until I like get more tech. This actually shows you that. That's kind of cool. Didn't know that. That's why it's hidden right under this menu at the very end. It's like the least important thing. It's but 2 people. It's really impressive for 2 people. Like, it's super functional UI. It's simple. It's like really cost effective for the time. You can always like think of other ways to do stuff, but it's time and effort. Like, it's really great. What do you think of the art of the UI? It's super minimal. Yeah, I mean, it's cost effective. Like, they've got fairly nice icons, like limits. Like, I don't know how I'd convey that. That's pretty good. It's charts, yeah. Text. I wonder what that's supposed to be. Like, I know it's tech. It looks kind of techy. If it's supposed to be anything. They got really nice icons and stuff. Yeah. Like, it's really clear. Like, I mean, some of these could be clearer. Like, required for goat domestication and dog. So goat domestication there is actually a tech, but dog is actually a thing that you will gain by doing that. So it's a prerequisite for this, for goat domestication, but dog is like a thing you'll get. It's more clear here. So required for water. If you research this tech, you'll get water, but it also is required for then researching another tech. So yeah. Ooh, what does that do? Ooh, wow. So this is something I've always been wondering about games, is like in-game wikis. So some games do it, some games don't. like this is kind of an in-game wiki, and you can kind of move around and look at stuff. But I always wonder, like, is it worth it? Because like people will make wikis outside of the game anyway, and I don't know. I guess because I'm just it's always a case of like, what do you do as a person, like as a player? Like I generally don't look at those. I look at the wikis online. So then I'm like, oh well, it's not worth doing it. But then I'm sure there's a lot of other players that actually look at these in-game wikis and would miss it if it wasn't there. So it's always hard to try and separate like what your personal preferences are as a player, and what people want. So I mean, I guess that's what early access and like getting player feedback is from. So if people are like, clamoring for an in-game wiki, then you put it in. Oh, yeah, it's a classic example. Sending to apps says I've used it a lot. So, yeah, people do. Like, it's I guess it's the good thing with these things is trying to get numbers on it. Like, a lot of times I try and do surveys. Like, we were having a discussion about, like, how do you pan? Like, should you right-click to pan or left-click to pan? This doesn't let you do either. Middle-click to pan? Okay, so you can't actually do any kind of click to pan. And I took a survey of like 20 plus games to find out what do other games do. And like it's pretty broad, but it seemed like a lot of games did right click to pan slightly more. Some did middle and some do none. Like this game that the only way of panning is touching the edges. And like WASD basically. Middle mouse to pan, it doesn't work on mine. Maybe middle mouse is weird. What about this? Oh, middle mouse does work. Oh, it's because I'm using a remote desktop type thing. You're right. Middle mouse rotates the camera. It doesn't pan, as far as I look. By pan, I mean like this. So yeah, interesting. I think I'm not actually playing the game here. I'm just kind of waffling about the UI. We've got no fuel. Oh no, let's chop down trees. So like this is another thing, like if a game tells you something, like we have no fuel, you want to know like what do I do about that? So this lets you click on it and it says, oh, you need fuel to cook food and you can get it this way. It doesn't actually tell you how you get sticks or logs. Oh, it tells you down here. So I can be like, oh, how do I get sticks? Well, it doesn't tell you how I get it. Oh, is that actually like a... Oh, this is amazing. So at the bottom, it has a trail of like where you were. This is like your back button down here. It's not super clear, but like you're like, okay, I'm gonna go to Roundhouse, and then I'm gonna log. So it's like, oh, you were at Roundhouse. That's kind of fun. So yeah, I'll think, oh, I need logs, so I guess I'll click on this tree, and then the action is right there. But it tells me, oh, I can't do that because I need composite tools. But then I'm like, okay, so I need to collect sticks. So I click on the sticks and then click on the button. So it's like, with all these things, you're trying to like guide the player. Like how do they solve the problem that they currently have? And the tutorial explains how to use these kind of area things as well. Got some meat. Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else have any questions about UI, UX stuff? Because otherwise I can probably call it a day there. I think it's kind of an interesting game to look at. One of the only downsides by putting the menu at the bottom here is like you get kind of near the edge. If you misclick, then you end up panning, which I do more often than I would expect. So you could always have it so that like if your mouse goes and hits the edge of the screen here, then it doesn't do the panning. Could be interesting. Yeah. Oh, you guys can't even see the icons down here. But doing some water stuff. Yeah. Do UX designers make design systems? What do you mean by design systems? You mean like the things that you have for UX stuff in apps where you're like, here's the styles for a button? What do you mean by design systems? Because I'm totally not formally trained in UX stuff, so often I don't know the correct industry terms for things. Have I tried VR UX? No, I haven't tried designing it. I mean, I've played with VR, and I think one of the really interesting things about that is you don't need... I mean, a lot of it is kind of based on human interactions. Like, oh, you grab by using your hand like a grabbing action, and you throw by moving your hand and releasing your hand like that. So it's like really intuitive. I like games that let me play with the mouse only. Yeah, I guess that's why panning is useful sometimes with these. You can just, totally like lay back and just use your mouse to do pretty much everything. I wonder if that's like an accessibility thing as well. I haven't covered accessibility in that talk, but like it's that's important too. Like some players find it hard to use mouse controls and they just want mouse, or find it hard to use keyboard controls and just want mouse, and vice versa. Some people just want like keyboard, like a style guide. Also associated code components, next component. Yeah, I think you could do that. It depends on kind of how much UX you have in your game. Like if you're making something like, I don't know, a platformer, there's not going to be that many different ways that your UI is going to be used. We're making a city building game which has like a lot of buttons and menus and things, and it helps to be standard, to have like a standard way of doing stuff. So I use SketchUp for actually like designing the buttons and laying them out and kind of creating a style guide like that. And then I can export all of those assets to Unreal, which is what we're using for development. And then, so yeah, I kind of do have that. I'm kind of I'm the only person who is using the UI. So I don't need to make it too formal. If it was a bigger team, like actually people, putting together the menus, then I could as a lead, person. Oh yeah, Sketch. I guess it's called Sketch.app, so I call it Sketch Apps sometimes. Not SketchUp, not the 3D thing. Sketch, the one with like a kind of yellow diamond as the logo. Yeah, so sometimes those style guides can be helpful if you're working with a larger team, like to show them how to use the widgets you make. But yeah, currently it's just me, so I know I break my own rules all the time. This is not good. Personally, I don't need more than one panning method per keyboard and mouse. I could do this without screen age. Yeah, I wonder if there is. I think because it's still relatively early access. Oh, you can't even access the menu options from within here. Yeah, I mean, that's something they can add, but I mean, it's a team of 2, so you don't necessarily see it on Dawn of Man, but you might see it on some other game. Ooh, controls. So you would see it on other games that you could like turn off certain UI elements or certain ways of interacting with stuff. It's pretty cool. It's pretty good. So yeah, I think that's probably pretty much it. If you guys have any more questions about UI UX stuff, we're going to talk to you about that. But like, I think that's kind of just covering, what I do and some of the ways that I kind of think about UI UX design. Yeah, Sketch is Mac only, unfortunately. There's a couple of alternatives that are web-based that I tried, but were not identical to Sketch, and I'd already got used to how Sketch did it, so it was kind of annoying to move over. And I had a Mac, so yeah, it'd be nice if it was on other stuff, but yeah, I kind of like being able to define I used to use Photoshop and stuff for this, but the ability to define classes of things, like, oh, here's what my button background looks like, and then reuse that everywhere is amazing. And it's really useful to be able to mock up stuff with all of the assets like as is, and then export them, and then try and reproduce that in Unreal. I wish there was a nicer way of like doing that in like exporting from Sketch to Unreal. That would be pretty awesome. I know some big AAA games, like they have tools like that, and they export to HTML and they just render the HTML in game, because they just want to have like a one button click export and then reuse that in the game. I think that works a lot better when you have larger teams, or when you have to like support many different devices or stuff. Oh, do you want to talk about UI sounds? I think when should a button make a sound on hover and click? I think it should do both. I think a lot of the really kind of juicy sounding and satisfying UIs in games do both. So you hover over, and then it's sort of, the sound implies like, oh, you're hovering over something that is interactable. And then when you click, the click is a 2-part thing, right? So you've got the mouse down, so it should do a sound on mouse down, and then it should do another sound on mouse up, separate. Because if you go quick, it should go, but if you go slow, you'll only hear the first, and then as you release the second one. And that's only if you release the mouse within the button. Like if you, mouse down and then move your mouse outside of the visual button, and then mouse up out of it, it won't actually activate. Like it's buttons seem like really simple, but there's like more to them than you might expect. it's tactile feedback. Yeah, you mean the buttons in UI, you're trying to replicate the idea of like an actual physical button that you can hit. So yeah, if you want to check out games that have like really good tactile feedback, then I recommend. Oh no, I'm not banished. I like Northgard. I probably should have showed that. I can show that another time. But I think Northgard's like really good for fairly like cost effective. Like it's not super duper flashy. It doesn't seem to be like hundreds of developers. But like the buttons are really satisfying and chunky, and the UI is like clear enough. They use color, but they don't go too obnoxious with it. I think that's a really good example of like a AA kind of level of like polish to aim for. Thanks for joining, everybody. That was really fun. It was my first time hosting the stream, and I had a good time. I don't know about you guys, but I hope I can do this another time when I have some more cool UI UX stuff.